I'm Ben Weingarten, and this is the Weingarten Report, the show where we bring you the most critical stories and most compelling arguments and analyses on the most vital issues of our time. The Weingarten Report is brought to you by AMAC. In this week's episode, we look back at the Tiananmen Square massacre and what the lessons are for America today. June 4th marked 32 years to the day since the Chinese Communist Party massacred democracy protesters in the heart of Beijing. Deng Xiaoping, the supposed reformist Communist Party leader, called the literal and figurative shots. Dissenters from Chinese Communist Party rule had to be murdered. We in the West saw the image of Tank Man. We saw the brutality, tyranny, and the evil of the Communist Party regime when faced with anyone who would dare demand his or her basic rights. Tiananmen showed the regime's fear of competing ideas and the necessity to crush those who held them. Today, there are likely millions of Chinese people who have never seen that image of Tank Man, that indelible image. The party has airbrushed the history out of students' textbooks. On social media platforms, the Chinese people are unable to share messages regarding Tiananmen Square. The party neither wants its people to know that there were opponents to its rule, nor what it did to them. Hong Kongers are prevented from mourning the dead on pretext of Chinese coronavirus grounds. A vigil organizer has been arrested for promoting unauthorized assembly, according to the BBC. De facto party operatives at the mercifully dwindling Confucius Institutes across America self-censor regarding Tiananmen on our soil. And look at what else we ourselves do in the West. For years, we permitted de facto Communist Party operatives to propagandize again on sensitive topics, just like Tiananmen on our campuses. But beyond that, entertainers like John Cena film videos as if they're hostages of the regime, groveling for having the gall to describe Taiwan, rightfully as a country, as a symbol of what China could be, were its people freed from communist tyranny. Just days before June 4th, I myself received a warning from LinkedIn, an American company. It read, and I quote, "Due to legal requirements impacting the accessibility within China of some publishing organizations, your profile and your activity, such as items you share with your network, are not visible to those accessing LinkedIn from within China at this time." Unquote. Presumably, LinkedIn warned me because I am listed as a columnist for the Epoch Times. Chinese Communist Party-tied thugs have ransacked the Epoch Times offices and beaten up its employees before. What's worse, American corporate media likes to attack the Epoch Times too, doing the CCP's bidding. The massacre of 1989 proved not even a speed bump on China's path to economic and political integration with the West. Within a decade, America delinked human rights considerations from trade with China, and the rest is history. That integration has enriched and empowered the Chinese Communist Party to the point where it threatens to become the dominant world power, to supplant America. The embrace of China corrupted the West. In exchange for cheap goods and promises of massive markets for our own goods and services, we sold out our national interest. We sold out our national soul. Those who transact with China kowtow to the CCP, thinking it will protect their business out of cowardice or legitimate fear for their safety and security. They implicitly recognize that they're doing business with the same regime that massacred its own people for demanding their most basic rights. The ultimate trading counterpart is the Chinese Communist Party. The lesson China took away from Tiananmen, and which has only been reinforced over the last 18 months as our political class, our scientific community, and our media apparently covered up for the CCP in myriad ways, from refusing to investigate the origins of the coronavirus to severing the coronavirus from the CCP by arguing that to call it by its place of origin was racist, is that it could get away with murder. The free world would look the other way if profits or politics dictated it. In fact, Chinese Communist Party officials recognized this in real time during the democracy protests. They were very prescient. One party veteran stated at the time, "Of the fear that foreigners will stop investing, I'm not afraid." He added, Foreign capitalists are out to make money, and they'll never abandon a big market for the world like China. China knew America better than we knew China. The lesson we should have taken away was this. The CCP is a communist regime, and like all communist regimes, it's a horrific, brutal, lying, cheating, deceiving, and coercive one that will stop at nothing to retain and expand its power. And like all communist regimes, it is deathly afraid of anyone who would dare question it or challenge it, and it must threaten them, and when push comes to shove, even with death. It has to roll tanks into the streets when college students protest. It has to throw the Uyghurs in gulags, persecute Christians, savage the Falun Gong, suppress Mongolians and Tibetans, swallow Hong Kong, threaten to invade Taiwan, and menace those in the Chinese diaspora to ensure they toe the party line for the good of their families back home. It'd be a shame if something happened to them. That's what the CCP says. It must ensure that the outside world sees communist China as it wants to be seen by flooding the outside world with regime propaganda. Even better from the perspective of the regime is when the West adopts and propagates the CCP's narratives all by itself. How many times have we seen this during the coronavirus crisis? We've been speaking in China's preferred tongue, in China's preferred narrative, for months about the pandemic. Right up to the point that, as Vanity Fair revealed in a recent expose, we had senior U.S. government officials calling for terminating any probe into the coronavirus's origins, so as not to open up a can of worms, in the officials' words. As General Secretary Xi Jinping has put it, it's critical to, quote, make the foreign serve China. Boy, have our betters in Washington, D.C. and newsrooms across this country done that. Xi's regime takes the same view as that of Deng Xiaoping when it comes to dissent, because the party cares above all about enriching and empowering itself. It can't tolerate dissent. In 2013, early in Xi's rule, the party's Central Committee put out a notorious directive to all its underlings called its Communique on the Current State of the Ideological Sphere, or Document 9. Why do we care about this document? Well, it laid out that in the eyes of the party's senior leaders, some of the biggest threats that it faced, in its own view, were these: promotion of Western constitutional democracy and Western human values, the sanctity and primacy of civil society, economic liberalization, a free and independent press, historical nihilism in rejecting the communist revolution of 1949, and questioning of socialism with Chinese characteristics, Xi Jinping's ideology. To combat these problems domestically, Document 9 suggested that party leaders take to heart the notion of perpetual struggle in the war of ideas. They were to make work in the ideological sphere a high priority in their daily agendas, routinely analyze and study new developments in the ideological sphere, react swiftly and effectively, and preemptively resolve all problems in the ideological sphere. The document stresses that nobody be permitted to disseminate, quote-unquote, opinions that oppose the party's theory or political line, and that the media must be of one heart and mind with the party, and that there be absolutely no opportunity or outlets for incorrect thinking or viewpoints to spread. Document 9 makes clear that views and ideas at odds with those of the party pose an existential threat to its rule, that words are as powerful, if not more powerful, than bombs or dollar bills. Per Document 9, the CCP must counter conflicting worldviews. It must censor them at home and effectively challenge them abroad through information warfare, subversion, corruption, and coercion. That the party views Western ideals and institutions as hostile to its own, of course, puts the United States, the primary promoter of these ideals and institutions, squarely in China's crosshairs. And it's no mistake, by the way, that China refers to the U.S. and has referred to the U.S. as an enemy in its internal documents for domestic consumption for several decades. It's not just some amiable trade partner. We'd obviously know this now, but it's been out there for decades and we've ignored it to our own detriment. Our response to the CCP in this 100th year since its murderous founding must be to get out of this bear hug in which the regime has us, which starts with recognizing its true nature. We have to appreciate, acknowledge the implications of, and speak openly, honestly, and audaciously about the evil nature of the Communist Party, its hegemonic ambitions, and its ruthless pursuit of them. We must stand proudly and confidently for our values and principles of liberty and justice, rejecting the importation of anything like an American social credit system, and turning back the rolling anti-cultural revolution, the anti-cultural revolution that the Chinese Communist Party itself eggs on. We must reject a ruling class here that not only kowtows to China's rulers, but apparently seeks to emulate them by similarly crushing and stifling any and all dissent. And lastly, we must penetrate China's great firewall, which keeps the truth from its people, and expose that truth to China's citizens about the party under which they languish and about the vastly superior alternatives to its Marxist-Leninist agenda. The truth, which would sow the seeds of dissent, is the greatest weapon that can be employed against the CCP. And by the way, it's the greatest weapon that can be employed against our own apparent party apparatchiks here in America, too. And that is why the CCP, just like some in our woke ruling class, must silence truth speakers and dissenters. And that is why we must devote ourselves ever more doggedly in the ideological sphere. The sphere the CCP, and unfortunately all too often, our ruling class fears the most. In this way, we will honor the lives of those lost at Tiananmen Square and defend America in the face of the greatest threats it faces in the 21st century. Be well, America.